Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Sounds like a loud discussion there, Tim. I think here we are back on Exploring the Bizarre, but Tim Beckley either oh, there he is! You have your mic shut off here?
I was just awestruck. I was holding my breath. I can't believe the sight of that gigantic craft in the sky coming in over the mountains. It's just tremendous, and all those people were standing there and watching it, and it was unbelievable. I know this is going to cause a sensation. This is going to be known as the Phoenix Lights, I think. I mean, what a string of craft. These had to be from somewhere else, I think. In fact, tonight we're going to maybe find out where they come from, because tonight we have on one of my favorite all-time UFO people, Jim Dilettoso from Phoenix, who actually analyzed the Phoenix Lights videos, as well as some other. Well, he's a top analysis as far as UFO photos and films go. Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about Jim there? You have his bio and all in front of you.
Well, of course. Well, Jim is one of the best-known figures in UFO and exotic science research for over, oh my gosh, it's been more than 30 years, I think. He's been recognized as one of the leading analysts of UFO pictures and videos. He's tested over 2,000 photographs and 400 video cases, and he's appeared on over 100 TV broadcasts, including sightings, one of my past favorite shows. He's been on the Discovery Channel, A&E, Disney, MTV, CNN, our show UFO Hunters, which I know that you've been on before, Tim, and the BBC. So I think probably the first time that I ever ran across Jim's work is, like you said, when he was talking about his analysis on the famous or infamous, possibly, Phoenix Lights. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to introduce to you tonight Mr. Jim Dilettoso. Jim, thanks for being with us tonight. Hi. How you doing?
Thank you. Jim and I have not spoken in a while. We have been known over the years to hang out a bit. We're both into the music scene. In fact, Jim's background is in entertainment and music. In fact, in my book here, Shirley Maclaine Meets the Palladians, there's a photo of Jim and Shirley Maclaine, and another picture of him holding the gold record that he received for his work on the Moody Blues Long Distance Voyager album. And
one of my favorites.
Well, Jim, I think for the benefit of our listeners who may not be so much, may not know that much about you. I know they've seen you on TV there, sitting in front of the computers and analyzing the Billy Meier photos and the Phoenix Lights. But how did you get into all of this?
Well, at a very young age, I started renting out equipment to people. That was when I was about 20. I had been playing in some rock and roll bands back in that era. Sometimes we even got paid. But I made a business out of renting out equipment, oscilloscopes, and as the years went on, speaker cabinets, lights, measurement equipment, big sound systems, video projectors. And so I had a lot of equipment around because we owned it and rented it out, but not in the winter. It's not good to drive truckloads of equipment city to city in the winter. Lots of other stuff can happen. So we would go be snowbirds. And by 79, we were doing that in Phoenix. And I would look for other things to do.
You're not originally from Phoenix?
No, I grew up back east. My teenage and college years in Connecticut and New York.
Oh, whoa.
And when I was very young in Virginia, my mom and pop taught in Shenandoah Valley in Stanton, Virginia, at the Virginia School for the Deaf and Blind. Pop was the coach. Mom taught dance and music. I had to do both. I liked it. But later on, when my dad died, my mom remarried. We moved to Connecticut, so that's where it all was happening for me. And I played in some bubblegum bands, that had some hits, but that wasn't my main occupation. Staying out of the draft was the main occupation. Staying in college had its upside and necessities. Anyhow, renting out equipment. In the winter, we'd look for other things to do, keep my crew together, keep my trucks and buses, which we did that all through the 70s. I started in the early 70s and had a couple nightclubs in the mid 70s, big nightclubs, bowling alley size. So we didn't tour. Point of the story is, I hope I make a long story interesting. We got hired by people in the film business regularly to rent our lights and generators. And this guy, John Stefanelli, hired us to work on the Shroud of Turin movie narrated by Richard Burton, and that we would work in transferring the scientific images over to film. Did that couple months. Following year, John asked us if we could analyze pictures. And I said no. Didn't know how. Soon after that, he wanted to see me. I think he wanted to see our tour bus, for whatever the reason. He came over and showed me these pictures that he wanted to have tested. And they were all from APRO in Tucson. Mm-hmm. And introduced me to Jim and Coral Lorenzen, and took me down to Tucson, met Wendell Stevens, and they had a whole bunch of pictures that they wanted to expose to a real laboratory analysis. And I had made a hobby business out of going to trade shows and doing little stories, writing reviews on equipment that, of course, we were always hunting for equipment that we could rent out. So I got involved in the Shroud of Turin project following year in a low level, just a grunt level, transferring images. And the following year, setting up different experts from the industry to analyze pictures from the APRO collection. That's how I first got involved and met those people and spent a few years acquiring equipment and doing it and getting pretty good at it.
Had you had an interest at all in UFOs or had a sighting or anything?
No. I was more interested in orange sunshine and the volume and clarity of the sound on the stage. Actually.
Yeah.
I remember the orange sunshine. So.
Yeah, those were very bright mornings. Those were nice, organic mornings. That's what I'm referring to. Things in nature.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Uh-huh.
So when you first were given this batch of UFO pictures by APRO, I mean, did you scratch your head and say, are these people, a little bit odd or strange or?
Well, we weren't doing it for money. I've never ever tested UFO pictures for money or other esoteric things.
Uh-huh.
Because it can be said that you skew your opinion towards the people that are paying.
Yes.
So I do that. I took it seriously because Jim and Coral Lorenzen were professionals in the astronomy field. They were the first people to tell me about you. And Coral did, because I was going back to Connecticut, and she said, "Oh, do you know Tim Beckley?" Of course, I didn't know anybody then in the late 70s in this field, but I approached it, and a couple of my engineers approached it, that we go to the big trade shows, we find out who the top people are writing scientific work papers, who are the big users, who are the big manufacturers, and we go to those people and see if we can enlist them. And when you got someone from the Beach Boys or Moody Blues or Alice Cooper with you, because they like the topic too, they like to go to the trade shows. Hey, you want to go to a trade show and see if we can get people to test UFO pictures? Are you kidding? That's easy to build a little fleet to go to. We do that. And got a number of people, many people who would do their part, like testing blood or testing skin samples. You know, it's not the whole. You're not analyzing the whole health or the whole situation. You're doing your little part. So that's what.
How exactly do you test a UFO photo to determine whether it is authentic or not? Because in a lot of cases, these are lights in the sky. Some of them have absolutely no background reference whatsoever, right?
Well, yeah, and especially then, I mean, you didn't have the expensive computers and everything that you have now.
Yeah, that's right. And computers were emerging, though, and we did have access to a number of the main companies. But the whole science of photogrammetrics, analyzing film shot from high altitude airplanes and medical imagery, was a strong foundation for what are mistakes and what are the optical issues in large and small objects. I mean, that's really what it is. Is it a large object, a small object, the closer far to the camera, or is it something else? Is it airplane lights? Is it reflections in a window? And it took a few years to really get a database where we had a way, and a lot of experts feeding into what we were doing, to have a way like fingerprints. The best way I can compare it, the way that the process inevitably landed was a way of analyzing every picture, like every fingerprint is analyzed using the same metrics, the same meters, numbers, to give it a signature. Oh, yeah, this has an arch. It has a loop. Oh, it does a 17-B9 S1123. There's sections, there's indexes, there's ways of categorizing what is in every image. And then you can search through all the millions, literally millions of known objects and get a match, because you have a way of filing all of the attributes of an unknown picture, the lights, the edges, the many conditions that we now view as normal. It's all normal. You know, you do it in your cell phone. You know, you can hold the camera up, show a picture. You know, where is this? Where in the world, what is this? Or even a song, you know, what song is this? Can be identified. This is the same thing. We built a very large database of known objects, of special effects and edges and flares and stars and car lights. And what is it that makes this look like the moon? Big object far away. Hold your hand up. It's 2 inches tall. We arm out, fingers, measure the moon, 2 inches. Oh, here's a basketball coming at me. Hold your fingers up. Oh, it's 2 inches. Well, there they are. They're both 2 inches tall. One's a giant thing, long distance away. The other one's a basketball, not quite as far away. How does our mind's eye and our brain know that? And know it every time. What is it really looking at, studying? And it's the edges, and it's the contour, and it's the focus, and it's things that can be turned into numbers and then compared. And basically, it works every time. Once you get it, it works every time. So we approached it scientifically. We approached it seriously. Like it may not seem like it, but a loud rock and roll band in a stadium, playing loud, having fun, big audience is a serious thing. Of exactly how do you do the engineering and how do you make that happen? We took the science of UFO pictures the same way, and within 80%, 90% degree of accuracy, we can tell the series of 14 passes a scan, looking for something different every time. If it's a large object, a small object, is it close, is it far, is it a match in the database? And if we get a match, we know what it is. If we don't get a match, it's an unknown.
So were you impressed? I mean, were there objects there from that the group of pictures from APRO that you said to yourself, well, these are not anything that we have categorized?
Well, APRO, we didn't have anything categorized when we started with APRO.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It took a few years and me meeting a lot of people. I mean, we had to go out and meet everybody that was doing UFO picture analysis, that was doing NASA, that was doing airplanes, that was doing medical, and build our own pathway, our own credibility to have those people deal with us. Meanwhile, you got mean-spirited people with no code of ethics.
Yes.
Back inside of the UFO community who you think you're doing this for, a unified front, and it's not a unified front. Mm. It's every group, it's every set of initials for themselves, that the more precise we would do something, the more attacks there would be on it. We weren't trying to be cosmic messengers. We were doing what we had been asked to do. But then other people would ask us to do it, and we would give it our best. And we was half a dozen of us inside of the company. And as my crew would always say, no, Jim merely owns the company. You want anything done, you come see us. And that was true. I mean, I wasn't an engineer of all things and everything. I merely owned the company and had to do the sales and management of the tours and get all the equipment and do all the engineering and handle all of that stuff, while I had experts inside the company who were running the tours and engineering the equipment. And then we got into renting video equipment and video projectors and image processing equipment. And there was a lot going on. And then supercomputer, Village Labs, we were running a $20 million supercomputer for rent. And so we had good stuff to use to test and analyze, but we didn't have good collaborators, or good receptors in the UFO field. We had a handful that I think had the same spirit that we did. For you, for example, I mean, it was serious, but it wasn't glum. It was, if extraterrestrials come here, I think they want us to be happy. Spirits come here, come and go, life after death, intertwined, intergalactic, place hopping, blah, blah, blah. It's a giant set of new rules of physics and emotions and spirit. That's not a glum thing to get out there and figure it out.
Absolutely. You're absolutely 100% correct. So now, of course, you have been associated with the very controversial Billy Meier photos. Were they first presented to you by Wendell Stevens?
I wouldn't say Wendell Stevens. I would say Lee Elders. Mm-hmm. Although it was all the same group, but the first, it was an investigation group, and Wendell was the field investigator and the guy getting the evidence, the material. Lee was the person who handled the timetable, the signing of the evidence samples in and out, the collection of the reports, and understanding how we were doing it and why and what, that was Lee. And I had a lot of dealings with both Lee and Britt and Wendell. I mean, large amount. But at first it was Lee, and then it became Wendell.
Well, and, after the fact, you really got a lot of flack from people who just, absolutely refused to believe, the results that, that you got from those photographs.
Well, okay, here's the thing. You're saying the results that I got.
Mm-hmm.
The results, the first 2 years of results were me taking the photograph to over 50.
Wow.
50 other people. In the back, the investigation report, not the contact from Pleiades photo book, but the two investigation journals were a day by day, 6 years of logs of testing and all the places that we went and took it, including Michael Malin, who worked on the noted Mars project. He was very much a collaborator in the late 70s on analyzing the photographs and found no evidence of a hoax.
Wow.
And so I didn't start doing testing on my own until years later.
Right.
I mean, I was learning from experts that were going and gathering information from, and inevitably I acquired a few $50,000 computers to rent out to people by the hour, by the day, which was a low price, by the way, compared to the cost of a lot of our sound equipment, which was hundreds of thousands and up. But still, we had it and we rented it and we did it. But I never found any reason to believe that this one-armed guy, even 10 people, could make this image and get it on film. That's what we got, 35 millimeter film, that it was anything other than a large object. And it was a 25-foot object. That's what it was, no doubt about it.
All right. Well, we have to go to our bottom of the hour break, Jim. So when we come back, Tim Beckley and myself, we will continue our conversation with Mr. Jim Dilettoso on exploring the bizarre. So stay tuned for more. We'll be right back.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
I have to warn people all the time about jumping in the chat room because it's a very low, very low ceiling in there. So do be careful if you're going to jump into the chat room. But
and a rocky bottom.
And so Jim, we left off talking about Billy Meier. And, I have to admit, I am not a big fan of Billy Meier. Now, you could say that some of the photographs are real, but we know that some, too, are also mounted on top of the wedding cake photos, for example.
That could be. That could be.
Yeah, well, I've seen the photographs of them with the car showing underneath. I mean, it's not like, somebody's tried to hide the fact even.
But what I do is, like analyzing blood, I analyze the evidence that's given to me. I don't analyze or talk about or pass judgment on a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm not really a supporter of or an antagonist of the Meier case. I am the messenger of the 6 photographs that I analyzed.
Okay, so you analyzed 6 photographs.
Correct. And then there were another 25 or so that we had analyzed by others. We would give different photographs to different people to analyze. Never had anyone say this is a model, this has been superimposed. Never had anyone, except in the group of people that are known to be naysayers, such as MUFON and CalCorp and people that make careers out of naysaying of things. But there are very exacting ways to know whether something is large or small by focus field indexing and by contouring of an object. You can tell the same way that the cruise missile knows as it's flying, okay, that's a tennis ball coming at us, move over. That's the moon way over there, keep flying. So the optics for knowing large and small dimensions is well entrenched in image processing. Actually, we never said anything, but it was really kind of a joke to us what a lot of UFO investigators would come back with as what they say was UFO picture testing. It's really sad. There's really no scientific principles that guide UFO investigations or a code of ethics of how people behave.
That's for sure.
Every scientific organization, engineering, botanical, agriculture, stainless steel manufacturers, and steel beam walkers have code of ethics of how people behave. Even the Boy Scouts have a code of conduct and code of ethics. UFO investigations have none. A group of people that tried to create that with the original UFO Congress that kind of got away from them as the event became, it's 2-3 generations later, it's become, just another ticket sales event. There's no collaboration amongst any of the speakers. I can't think of any time in any going back in the UFO Congress other than the first couple of years when all of the investigators or the speakers got together and had a roundtable on what are the real cases, what's going on, what resources are needed. In the olden days, a lot of that happened at like some of the early events that you put on, Tim.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Jim. Absolutely.
Your events would have panels where the panel people were advocated to get together first for a while and work it out instead of shooting from the hip up on the stage. But that doesn't happen anymore. I don't see any collaboration amongst investigators. It's every man for himself. I like you, so I believe your case. I don't like him, so I don't believe his case.
And so, okay, well, outside of Billy Meier, would you say that the Phoenix Lights was probably received the most, even more attention, certainly, than the Meier case?
Yeah.
It still does even to this very day.
Yes. There's a few other cases that I worked on got a lot of attention. The Tim Edwards case up in Colorado a year before the Phoenix Lights got
that's right. He came to one of our conferences. That was the fellow that had the like cigar-shaped object up above his house.
Right.
Yes,
that's right.
Yeah, well, there were two people, if I remember correctly, that had very, very similar videos or films that they had taken.
Yeah, during that one day in Colorado. But an interesting thing in studying trends of looking at the photo data done by National UFO Reporting Center and Peter up there that runs that, and some of the other people that have published dates and trends and shapes, etc. If you look at all those, there's an interesting set of coincidences that happen of seeing a big cigar-shaped ship, and then within the year, seeing in the same area, seeing collections of orbs. And then within a year after that, seeing flying formation, V formation of orbs. So it's cigar, orbs, V-shaped orbs. And we see that in France, 1952. We see it in Belgium. We see it in Russia. We see it in Brazil. cigar-shaped ship, orbs, triangle of orbs, all within, 500-600 days. Same pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a pattern?
The thing for me when I see some of these photographs of, basically what, seems to be triangle shapes, but they're just lights. It's hard to discern whether or not there's actually a solid body behind these lights, or if it's just the lights themselves.
Right. And that's a really important thing is the formation of the orbs. Is there a structure between it, even if it's just a microwave or a magnetic field structure that's generated by the orbs, or is it a solid mass that has lights on it? And the study of these flying machines has come down to that. It's not, do they come here? It's, well, what are they doing when they come here, and why are they coming here, and what's the science behind what they're doing and that they're hiding? I don't think there's a government cover-up at all. I think there's an extraterrestrial cover-up.
Well,
if they extraterrestrials come here didn't want there to be a cover-up, there wouldn't be one.
Right. Exactly.
And that we could do everything known to man to do full disclosure on the White House lawn, the Moscow, worldwide, UN simultaneously. And the ETs are still going to be a no-show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they promise they're going to show up, at a certain time and place, and they don't show, and they're very. Sometimes they can be very deceptive. I mean, they give you a try to hook you in. I mean, it's very bizarre in the sense if they wanted to cover up themselves entirely, well, they wouldn't produce the Phoenix lights and fly over a city with a million population and hover over the the highway. Now, do you
unless they were a distraction? Hey, look at these bright lights over here.
Or they were new arrivals.
Yeah.
There could have been new arrivals. There's some things in front of the timeline, in front of the Phoenix lights, that make it possible that we are seeing evidence of new arrivals, beings getting here from a great distance away. And they got here and fly along a given geophysical area on Earth. If you take a cross-section from Sedona, Arizona to Tucson, take a cross-section, go down 1,000 feet, take a cross-section of that whole area and look at it sideways, the layers of materials look like a metal oxide semiconductor, CMOS chip, that from 1 billion miles away, would that cross-section of Earth be the same as a radio transducer? That's a metal oxide semiconductor transducer, the transceiver that is high-speed calculator and transmit receive in one little package. Well, the whole area that the Phoenix lights fly along is directly over top of that geological anomaly. Now, what was before that? For the 3 hours before the Phoenix lights, the Lucilla telescope and the Puerto Rico telescope, as reported in Scientific American in August 1997, reported that in March of 1997, there were unknown, interesting bursts of gamma radiation at a great distance away, and were imaged as these globular gamma balls. Then, after 5 incidents, I believe, it can be reread in the magazine there, 5 incidents separated by about 10 minutes apiece, there was an hour or so downtime, and the imaging of the gamma balls appear that they are in our solar system. Well, how did they get such a great, tremendous distance in such a short period of time? Although, of course, it's not real time, because if it's a billion light years away, it started a billion years ago. So we then have these mystery balls, billion light years away in the solar system, now flying over an area that if someone was going to lock on to a great distance and then do interdimensional place hopping, jump from one place to another, you'd lock on to something like that, like the terrain in Arizona. Lock onto it, center yourself, achieve mass, draw in more mass, get stabilized where you are, and then poof, out of here to somewhere else on the planet to set up, and then begin flying using the rules of like airplane wings that work in our atmosphere. Anyhow, that's just what I think.
Well, now when it comes to the whole Phoenix Lights and the sightings earlier that evening, I think there was only one video taken of the earlier sightings, which I think it was in the northern part of Arizona.
Yes.
Was any analysis done on those lights in comparison with the larger ones that were seen then over Phoenix?
Yes.
Later on that evening, were there any similarities? Was this the same craft or something different?
Well, it was similar enough to say that somehow they're related. For people that work in Photoshop or other image processing, they would know that you can look at any light with its RGB, red, green, and blue value, or the histogram as it's called, and you can categorize lights in part by their RGB, red, green, and blue, color spectrum content. Well, the color spectrum of the videos that were seen in Phoenix, over Phoenix, and the videos that come from northern Arizona have the similar aspects to how the lights are put together and of the formations that they fly. So the pathway starts in Paulden, Arizona, in northwest Arizona, comes down over Meier, and then over Phoenix down to Tucson, turns around and comes back. Goes behind the south part of Phoenix up to the Luke Air Force Base, flies near, almost over top of Luke Air Force Base, and back up to Paulden and out of the state. That's the pathway. Well, it's either coming from Nellis and other test facilities scattered in Arizona and Nevada, followed a pathway down and got was it something that was done purposefully to fly over residential airspace? Was it something that got out of control and they were able to get it back into control and bring it back, or was it something totally different? Whatever it was, it left the same way it came in from up in that part of the state, and all of the images, photographic and video, had similar enough properties that it could be said that they're fingerprints of a set of 10, from the same person. And that's not directly it's just more of an analogy.
Sure.
But they could be categorized as more like each other than like anything else that's out there, including Hale-Bopp.
Well, a lot of people naturally attribute the larger lights seen over Phoenix as military flares, but the analysis that you did showed the lights were just completely different than than flares.
Well, that's right. The optical characteristics are totally different, but the altitude and aperture to be able to see them from Phoenix, the distance away that they are south, is very unlikely. When I was talking about, by coincidence, the place that Kalinda and I were working down in Tucson, two of the guys that worked there were the former base commander and the chief pilot of the Arizona National Guard. Remember, they were all supposedly involved in the Phoenix Lights and knew what was going on and all that.
That's right, yeah.
Well, we would talk to them regularly after work and during work about those people from Maryland. They're just making it up. In fact, they were saying that the people from Maryland who said that they were the ones that dropped the flares were lying. We have people from Arizona National Guard saying that the people from Maryland National Guard are lying because they were sitting with them at 6:30 at night that night drinking beer. Now, if drinking beer together is not a cover story and a good reason, I don't know what is. Okay? But that they couldn't have been up there at 8:30 dropping flares up at 12 to 20,000 feet altitude and being seen from Phoenix, because you never drop those flares or go higher than 6,000 feet down there in that range, even if they were there at that time, 6:30 to 10 o'clock, and could keep those flares hanging up in the air. It's really kind of funny. And it was cool to be working with people that if they're drinking beer, we're drinking beer too. Okay.
Well, I wonder then why they claimed to do that, or were they told to say that?
Yeah. Well, then there's another piston on this Wankel engine.
All right.
This Yankel engine, and that was Governor Fife Symington, who at first was going to investigate the flares, and then he came out with his chief of staff in a rubber spacesuit and said, "We found the mystery of the flares, and here it is." And his chief of staff came out with a rubber spacesuit on. Meanwhile, 6 weeks later, Eileen Benz, the public information officer for the Arizona National Guard, which is run by the governor, by the way. President of the United States runs the military. Governor of a state runs the National Guard. Right. So Governor Fife Symington, National Guard, Eileen Benz, chief public information officer, comes out and says, "Oh, guess what? It was the Maryland National Guard. We forgot to tell you back then. Oh, it was the Maryland National Guard." And they were flying bombing missions out over the Goldwater Range, which is south of Phoenix, near in between Phoenix and Tucson, and that's what everybody saw, and that they were particular kinds of flares that can hang motionless up in the air for 3 minutes, seemingly motionless, and only slightly go down. Well, we analyzed the color spectrum of them. We analyzed for the smoke. We talked to, in fact, he also went on other television shows. We talked to a guy who built flares, was a flares designer for the U.S. military and the CIA, named Chuck Byers. Chuck Byers said, "I looked at that video too. Somebody's making it up. Those are definitely not flares." Meanwhile, we got MUFON, who is mad because they're not on television. A lot of people become against the case because they're not the ones picked to be on TV.
Isn't that the way it always happens?
It is. Right.
Yep.
Right.
Oh, hey, by the way, I guess you heard this, that one of the witnesses who just came forward was the actor Kurt Russell, who it turns out was piloting a plane that was about to land at the Phoenix airport. He said, "I was the pilot. I saw 6 lights over the airport in absolute uniform in a V shape."
Yes.
So there you go. And the case still gets a lot of attention to this day, because it certainly is one of the more mystifying ones. Now, they have returned. I mean, when I was staying out there a couple of years ago, I was staying at the Ritz-Carlton, and we're having dinner. Beautiful view of the whole, area, and happened to mention it to the the waitress on duty, and she says, "Oh, we've seen them before." So there are other sightings, and and apparently Phoenix and that area, of course, has always been kind of a hotbed for UFO activity, because you've got a pretty darn good view of the sky, which you certainly don't hear in Manhattan. I'll tell you that. We've got 4 skyscrapers going up, all within a radius of a block of me. I mean, right on the block where I am. You couldn't see. You couldn't see the stars if they, if there were any. I mean, it's unbelievable. You'd have to live in one of those fancy, $40 million penthouse apartments with a telescope in your on your patio or something like that.
Yeah.
Then you see reflections. So
our mystery guest, our mystery guest that's going to be on in a little while, I think it's going to be really important to hear what this guy has to say about a number of obscure cases that have far more credibility and far more to contribute to the overall body of work than big cases like the Phoenix Lights. Phoenix Lights are great. That's really good. But you have to have been out there in the thick of it for 20, 30, 40 years and seen it on a constant basis. Not in for a little while, out, drive by, investigation. But I think.
Well, Jim, let's hold it there, because we got to go to our top of the hour break, and when we come back, we will find out who our mystery guest is on Exploring the Bizarre.
Exploring the Bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight we are talking with Mr. Jim Dilettoso, and I'm going to hand the reins over to Jim, because he is going to introduce us to our secret mystery guest, who we will interview for the second part of tonight's program. So Jim, take it away.
Well, I got a message through the grapevine a few days ago that Tim was thinking about having some other guest on, but didn't know who it might be that would be interesting for me to, share stories about, or know what they were up to, or vice versa. But it was unclear to me what was being asked. So I started thinking about, guest. Does he mean another investigator? What does Tim mean? So I thought about it, and I finally came to the conclusion that the best person to have on the air, who I would like to know things from that person, and the audience would love to know more from this person who has been a producer, a director, an author, has written many, many books, published, been an investigator, has been in it for years and years. And our mystery guest is Tim Beckley.
Oh.
Well, there you go. Let me take a bow here. Yes.
So Tim Schwartz was in cahoots with me on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
well,
we'll have
to cut back on his pay then.
No, not again.
Yeah, but my choices of having somebody on, or somebody that I wanted to blow some smoke up there, or wanted to patronize them or find out stuff, I came to bottom line is you. So I went and looked online to find interviews with Tim Beckley, and I only found 2.
No.
Yeah, well, there needs to be more out there. So there's going to be another.
There are so many interviews that I've done. It's now, are we talking written interviews or audio interviews, or
we're talking just like we're doing right now? Where
man, I have done so many interviews it boggles the mind. I mean,
well, how come I never heard any of them? How come I don't know how long ago you started? Because I find pictures of you from the 1930s where you already look like an adult. You know?
No. I got started in this. I got started in this probably when I was about 10 years old. I mean, I went out and I think I found a copy of Fate magazine. It was 35 cents in those days, and you know. The ghost stories and the life after death experiences spooked the hell out of me, to be honest. With you, and then I guess a couple of years later, I had my first of 3 UFO sightings. You know, the first one being while I was growing up in New Jersey, and they were two bright lights in the sky. Yeah, one directly over the house where we were sitting on the front porch, and one over in an abandoned factory building. And these things, like circled in the sky probably for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then the one across the street, it looked like somebody had pulled the light switch or something, because it just went out. And we were all seated outside, because in those days there was no air conditioning. I mean, it's you just sweated it
Sit
out
on the
until
porch.
sit on the porch. Yeah, at least you knew your neighbors. I mean, we have no idea who our neighbors are now, because they're all visitors from foreign countries, actually. But staying here in the apartment building. But anyway, so I started reading up on the literature, and in those days you had your choice. You could pick some of the wilder accounts, the contactee stories like George Adamski, or you could get, and I use this in quotes, more serious with some of the works of Major Donald E. Kehoe, who was running the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, and then there was Edward Ruppelt, who wrote a report on UFOs. And so I guess I consumed all the literature that I could find. In those days, paperback books were like $0.25 or 35 cents, And Frank Edwards was another one. They offered that his books and the books of Charles Ford in the Weekly Reader. They had a book service. So I read all this stuff, and I wrote to the local newspapers. Asking for anybody in the area who had UFO sightings to report them to me, and I start getting phone calls and mail from people who seem to have legitimate sightings of their own, and some of them even involved, for lack of a better term, creatures. I remember there was one case near Trenton. There was a reporter who worked for the Associated Press. His name was Emil Sloboda. And I think probably the most famous article on the UFOs that he ever wrote, there was a fellow who was a night watchman somewhere in the Trenton area who had an encounter with a UFO while he was on duty as the watchman. And I guess he was slightly burned, or he had some negative experience. And he actually hired a lawyer to collect, unemployment. What do you call it? Insurance, benefits.
Did he prevail?
Yes, he did.
He got it. He got it.
He got it. And this would have been in late 50s.
60?
Yeah, something like that. And so Emil Sloboda started printing my letters. I remember I wrote to him about undersea UFO bases. And then I was getting calls from a lot of stations. They didn't realize I was about 15 years old at the time.
A long time ago, you told me about when you would mimeograph, that you had a little newsletter and a mimeograph machine. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, in those days, you could actually go to the bank and put 50 cents in a week. The school in school, they had a thing where you could start a bank account, and every week you
Yeah.
brought in your quarters, and so after a while, I had like $300 saved, and I decided
Wow.
to
Lot.
splurge. So I went out and I bought this Gestetner mimeograph machine, and it was me and Jerry Clark. In fact, I found the book called Inside the Saucers 1962, which
You
is
mean-
the first thing that I actually published as far as a volume went. It was printed on a ditto machine, and I had since lost. I mean, I didn't have a copy, but Rick Hilberg found one in his collection, so he sent it to me. And I'm having somebody reset the type, and I'm going to put this out exactly the way that it was published.
That's great.
When I was like 15 years old, and some of the material is pretty doggone good. In fact, I was the first, I believe, to actually talk about how some of these craft might have been the inventions of some of these Nazi scientists and engineers
Yes.
that were brought over here as part of Project Paperclip, a theory that has gotten more popular over the years and certainly was not at all accepted back in those days. So I started out with this newsletter.
And Jerome Clark.
Well, it was Jerome Clark and a lot of people who later became
Yeah.
well established in the UFO field, including Lucius Farish, who had the Ozark UFO conference for a while. But we had a falling out with him because he didn't like the fact that I was associated or friends with Jim Moseley or Gray Barker.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because
The
they
big
were
skeptics.
known. Well, not so much skeptics, but they were known as
No
I don't know if
nonsense.
the word sort of antagonistic and pranksters. Jim Moseley was always known as the court jester of ufology.
I like Jim Moseley. I got along with him great.
Didn't? I worked for him for quite a number of years at Saucer News. In fact, when my Interplanetary News Service report became too much for me to handle, because remember, in those days there were no quick copy places or anything. You had to print them. You had to print them, and there were 40 pages, so 20 sheets of paper. We put them all over the couch and an ironing board, and you had to collate them by hand and staple them at the end and take them to the post office. And what a mess and time consuming, and it was cutting down on my schoolwork, which I was never all that great at. People said, "Oh, give up on that. You'll never make anything of yourself."
Give up on school or give up on the magazine?
Yeah. And over the years, of course, I became editor of about 30 different newsstand publications, some of which didn't last very long. To say
What were some of the magazines?
Well, one of my favorite actually was Front Page Disasters. It only lasted 3 issues, but I enjoyed doing it. It was for a small publisher. There were 2 brothers who called themselves Cousins Publications. I don't know why they didn't call themselves Brothers Publications, but it was Cousins Publications, and they put out all these very cheaply printed pulp magazines, printed on newsprint.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to do a magazine on disasters. Now, I never turned down a job. Even if I didn't know something about a subject, I had the ability to go out and find others who were, authorities or experts in their field. Yeah, just pretty much like we do with UFOs and so forth. Mm-hmm. So I enjoyed the Front Page Disasters. I mean, we had the airplane crashes and how safe it was to go on the train and stuff like that. And then there were. I always managed to get at least one, what I would consider to be offbeat story. I mean, I did an article on the Bermuda Triangle because many people were disappearing there. That certainly is a big ongoing disaster. Earthquake lights was another one I remember that because associated with a lot of earthquakes, especially in China in the 1920s, were these mysterious globes of plasma type phenomena, maybe orbs. I don't know what you want to call them, but they seem to be spying or keeping an eye on the area where these earthquakes were taking place. And in some of these earthquakes, I mean, They were responsible for the deaths of 60, 70,000 people. You know, the structures of the building were nothing like they are today. And in some of these more remote countries, it was just absolutely terrible what devastation could come about. So that was one magazine, and I actually enjoyed doing that. I did another.
Hey, Tim! Before you go on to that, why don't you tell us real quick the story about how that magazine ended up in a movie?
Oh yeah, you know, I did a book just recently. Tim and I worked on a book with Sean Castile and a bunch of other people. It's called the Matrix Control System of Philip K. Dick and the Paranormal Synchronicities of Tim Beckley.
Wow!
Now I have okay. Well, synchronicities follow me all over. I mean, you can hear some of the shows that I've did on the subject. Some of these things are amazing. I mean, I'm not talking about waking up and seeing the clock saying 444, or thinking of somebody and they call the next day on the phone. I mean, we're talking about something even stranger. There's some controlling factor here.
Like what?
And it does tie in with UFOs to a rather large extent, I would think. Anyway, okay. One evening I had a group of people, or friends, were drinking and had time, but a good time, and I got the TV on, and there's a murder mystery. Now I can't tell you the title of the movie because I've forgotten it, but I think that who was the fellow that was in Close Encounters that played
Richard Dreyfuss?
Richard Dreyfuss, yes.
And I bet the movie is called The Big Fix.
Well, I could never figure out what the title was, but there's a murder mystery. People are being murdered in this apartment building in New York, and he's trying to figure out who is responsible for these murders taking place. So there's one particular scene where he chases the suspect out of the building, but he's not sure whether the suspect went right or went left. So he goes up to the corner, and at the corner is one of these outdoor newsstands. And I guess he asked the proprietor or the owner of the newsstand, "Did you see anybody run past here?" And I'm looking at the newsstand, and normally they get cigarettes, a lottery. Well, this was even before I think lottery tickets or anything.
When was this? What year do you think?
Well, I would say. What would you say, Tim? The 80s?
Yeah, definitely. Probably around 87, something like that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So he's talking to the proprietor of the newsstand, and there's a bunch of magazines hanging up, like like
a clothesline.
Yeah, clothesline. Yeah. Clothesline with like
clips holding them up.
Clip.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like New York corners.
There's only one magazine visible, about 7 or 8 copies of Front Page Disasters. Now, first of all, the magazine did not sell a heck of a lot of copies. I never got the figures on it, but let's say they printed 60,000 and they sold 15,000. Otherwise, it would have lasted more than 3 issues, because break even was like 22%. If you could sell 22%, you could keep going with it. So this was already about 10 or 12 years after the final issue of the magazine. How in God's name did somebody get a hold of copies of this magazine, and why would they put them up on this clothesline and not put anything else up? I mean, it's just like so strange and so bizarre. And my friends, when I told them they were in the room, you're all getting drunk. Oh, yeah, sure. So I went to my magazine, rack here where I keep all my old issues, and I put it in. I said, yeah, look, here's the damn magazine, and it's in the movie for no particular reason that I know of. Somebody must have had a couple of cartons of the magazine in their basement, or they worked for a magazine wholesaler, dragged them out of the back of their van or something. Who knows? I mean, like, how did they end up in that movie? They didn't end up anywhere else, that's for sure.
And they wouldn't have to get a rights release from you. Any other magazine?
Because the magazine had been dead for 10 years, right? So and they figured nobody would see it anyway, right? Well, I've got eagle eyes, that's for sure. But
so from magazines to books. You started doing books, because I know you've done books, because I have at least 10.
Well, we've done about 270, I think.
books that you published.
Yes.
Wow.
We just came out with a book this week. It's called Hidden Treasures of the Knights Templar.
Mm.
And
Popular title.
Since my background is that of magazine publishing and magazine packaging, I kind of look at a book in the same way. I will take a manuscript, say one that's been in my files or something that's in public domain, and then I will call upon my freelancers, people that I associate with and work with, who are experts in a particular area, and ask them to contribute their thoughts on the subject. It's much like doing a UFO conference in book form.
Yes.
It's the best way that I can describe it. And I find it much more exciting than just sitting there and putting my stamp of approval on something. But I wouldn't call it exactly an anthology, because there is a thread that winds its way through the book. It's like one step at a time. Like with the Knights Templar book, we had Brian Allen from England. He wrote a chapter about Roslyn Chapel, which apparently there is some thought that maybe, Jesus might have been married, and it ties with with all the mysteries of the bloodlines and so forth.
Yes.
And then we had Renee Barnett, who has a radio show, a podcast of her own, write a chapter on Rennes-le-Château, which is another mysterious village in France. Yeah, where apparently the priest found some treasure and built the parish up and did a wonderful job of spending money lavishly. And
lots of money.
Lots of money. And somehow also, too, it ties in. Where do we think that the treasure may be hidden? Oak Island, which if you followed the TV series on the History Channel, it's not so much even, the Knights Templar were known as notorious like bankers. They were the first actual bankers and landowners, and collected a lot of taxes, and worked closely with the kings and queens who had them safeguard their jewelry. So when they left, apparently to the New World, because Jim, people were traveling all over the world back long before Columbus set foot in the New World. I mean, it's just it's a fact, but it's a fact that that's been covered up. I mean, apparently the shipping and the traveling was pretty well established. And I always say the idea that that the Earth was flat and that we'd fall off was fostered by countries and groups that didn't want anybody to travel outside of their own little local domain. So somehow the riches of the Knights Templar ended up off of Newfoundland on this little island there. But it not only includes the jewelry and gold and diamonds and so forth, but some of the greatest holy relics of of all time, including the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant and so forth. A very strange story. I mean, I never thought that, frankly, that I would be writing about the Knights Templar and the Middle Ages. It's something. But I'm always up for something new. My next project, I think, is going to be a book on phantom ships. I've always been fascinated by these the Flying Dutchman, and there are hundreds and hundreds of stories about similar events where ships have been seen that should not have sailed the mighty seas for hundreds of years. Yes. And that's something I'm looking forward to working on a little bit slowly. I'm collecting material, but that I think is going to be my next project.
Where do we get your books? Do we go to Barnes and Noble or online?
No. Well, we of course have our own website, which is theconspiracyjournal.com, which Tim Schwartz
had that a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. He operates that, and of course, if you go to Amazon.com and type in Inner Light dash Global Communications, 700 books will show up. I mean, there are some books there that have been long out of print that I did for other publishers. There's a couple of books on John Lennon.
Yes.
There's a couple of books that were pirated by other publishers. There's some foreign stuff and many editions of the titles that we've put out. You know, I've managed to keep some of these books in circulation for 40 years and edit
All right,
material.
gentlemen, I have to interrupt you here because we're going to our bottom of the hour break. When we come back, we will continue our conversation on exploring the business.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Once again, Tim, here we are. Last segment of the program, and time just seems to be flying. So why don't we get back to our conversation with Jim and our mystery guest, Tim Beckley.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the mystery guest? Oh,
mystery guest.
I could have tried to see if I had known this. I would have tried to disguise my voice through like one of these voice scramblers.
Yeah, that would have been tempting to do that.
Yeah.
We wanted to spring it on you because we didn't want you to know in advance and back out. That was my concern that you'd go, oh no. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Hey, Jim, I got to ask you. About the Moody Blues, because you were certainly associated with them, and they had a heck of a number of UFO sightings, and I know that one of the was it the flute player Ray Thomas, I think, who apparently even had a close encounter with aliens who visited his recording studio and left smudge prints on the plate glass window.
Yeah, that's right.
How did you get involved in them, and what was the scoop on their UFO?
I knew a woman named Emily Rainbow Terrain, who was Jimi Hendrix's girlfriend for a long time, and gave the Moody Blues their name. And I met Mike Pinder, one of the founders and the Mellotron keyboard player, through her introduction. And actually, Wendell Stevens and I went to his home. He's from England, but at that time he had a home. This was 1978. He was living in Malibu, California, and Wendell and I went and met him on the pier down there at Alice's restaurant and talked to him for a couple hours about his UFO experience. That's why he didn't know I was in the music business or anything. We were there. Wendell and I were, Emily knew that Michael wanted to know more about what had happened to him and a couple of the other guys in the band, and that it could just be discreetly set up. So we went, visited there on the pier. He wanted us to join him for dinner. So we went up to his house, a recording studio called Indigo Ranch up there in Malibu, and had dinner, stayed overnight, and talked, I don't know, could have been all night, and got to know Mike pretty well. While we were there, Mike found out other things, that we were already working with Jerry Weintraub and Concerts West. That was the same company that the Moody's were with at that time. And he thought that was an interesting coincidence. So he called while we were there. He made the decision that he was going to leave the band and that he was going to move to Hawaii and raise his sons, who at that time were still single digits in age, like 4 and 7 or whatever. So he gave notice that he was going to leave the band. And, oh, by the way, I met this guy that's here, and I get along with him, but he seems to know what he's doing and is working with Jerry and et cetera. And Tom Hewlett, their day-to-day manager already, Peter Jackson, all the names that were used that we then had to use over and over. to, per Mike Pinder's introduction, be engaged to work with the band or for the band in doing things, including the interface with Patrick Moraz and getting him to leave Yes and come and join the Moody's and other equipment and the Voyager theme, which I brought into the band, the idea of long distance Voyager, and the Voyager spacecraft and was a NASA project doing Jupiter and Saturn right there.
Yes.
We could piggyback on top of that and get images from Saturn and all of that. So I was hired to do that. And since I was already doing things for Three Dog Night and the Pointer Sisters, who were with Jerry Weintraub, we didn't have to audition ourselves technically, so to say. We'd already passed the difficult muster. So that got us deeply involved. And right in that first tour, right then, this was Long Distance Voyager, which was album number 9 after the octave. And Patrick had to hurry, come and record, overdub himself, in addition to, and sometimes replacing, Mike Pinder's keyboard parts for Gemini Dream, and I Know You're Out There Somewhere, and the other songs that were hits on that.
Well, I know we had a remarkable evening at one of our UFO conferences when Patrick Moraz showed up and ended up playing the piano in the lobby till about 3 a.m. I think, like that. Right?
Yeah, and in the ballroom, and
did a show. Yeah,
he was staying at my house. The band had, by coincidence, been doing the tour, and a couple days before, played in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. So Patrick and Ray came out, stayed at my house, Flying Heart Ranch, and then Patrick stayed on for a few days. So he came with me to go down to your event.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, now, and then played there.
Yes, indeed.
Like he played 2 nights, wasn't it? One night in the lobby in the lounge, and then the following night we brought dual keyboards and video projectors.
Oh my goodness! What a setup we had.
Yeah, and then a year or 2 later, you played with the UFO band.
That's correct.
We had at your event, and you were we were mostly visuals and no vocals.
Well, let's see. There were quite a few.
So you sang. So we had other guests, friends of yours, that joined us.
Right. The fellow there from the New York Dolls, who was a good friend of mine. In fact, he died. The bass player died on my birthday. He had invited me backstage. The Dolls were finally getting together after 30 years of being broken up. And Morrissey, the British performer, had managed to get David Johansen and all the rest of the band back together again. And they had played a couple of gigs in England. They were coming here to New York, and they were going to play Randall's Island. And I wondered why I didn't, hear from them as to where the backstage passes and all that, where they were. And I get a call from Blue Ocean. Our friend, the drummer, who was, of course, deceased now too. He called me at 2 a.m. in the morning to tell me that he had the bass player had he passed away. So it was a shock to us, and it's something that I still think about now. I'm still in touch with his Barbara, his wife, and we chat on Facebook every once in a while, and she's very much interested in UFOs and all. But so now Patrick, after he broke with what was he playing with? Yes, right at the time
he was playing with Yes.
Yeah,
and left Yes to come and join the Moody's and stayed with the Moody's 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. Tony Kaye was there. 2 keyboard players, and Tony was kind of over to the side, out of the way, and then Tobias would also play keyboards at the same time on stage, but it was featuring Patrick. But then as time went on, there were the 3 girl singers were added, and another drummer, and because Graham got arthritis, as everybody our age does, and or many people our age do. And the band swelled and got bigger and bigger. And Patrick left and went out on his own, and went back to he's from Switzerland, not England, and he's been back there for years as a studio manager and festival organizer. The 200 was it the 200 or 300 year anniversary of Mozart. He was the leader of that promotion and that effort in Austria, and the 500 year anniversary of Switzerland. I think it was. He was the person organizing that, and that's what he does now. I hear from him every now and then.
Jim, when I first met you, I was very impressed by the fact that you had so many UFO artifacts in your yard. Now I'm not talking. I'm not talking about pieces of the wreckage from Roswell,
right.
But you had. Well, I guess you were responsible for building one of the UFOs or the saucers that Electric Light Orchestra had taken on tour.
Right, in the Out of the Blue tour, we met them. We met got involved with the Emerson Lake and Palmer Tarkus tour, and I forget when that was, 73 maybe 74. We had made out of golf carts. There weren't electric golf carts then; they were gasoline powered. We welded these Tarkus monsters on the golf carts, and then in addition to sound, we were doing props. We're asked to do some things for Electric Light Orchestra, and we had proposed our round speaker cabinets and using those, which were done in the round, to doing the show in the round, and the stage would be built to be done in the center of the basketball court in the round, and most of the shows were in the round, and we built that system. Years later, we built the guy that was the general contractor for the US Festival, Ron Hayes, hired us, Alan Ames and I, to get the UFO that was basically a giant Chinese lantern that was suspended by helicopter that flew in over the closing of the US Festival in 1983. About 400,000 people out there in San Bernardino, California. And then the following year, same object, just with some extra hoops on it for the 1984 closing ceremony of the Olympics in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And it was a whole Star Wars alien closing ceremony theme. And I still have that kit. It's a big aluminum magnesium erector set that we made from scratch.
Well, now, Jim, why do you think that there seems to be such a crossover between the musical world, rock musicians, and UFOs? I mean, a lot of them have had UFO experiences, as we've pointed out. I mean, John Lennon, of course, had his big sighting over New York City here, and even wrote it into the lyrics of one of his songs, "Strange Days Indeed, Mama." I believe, so there just does seem to be more than inappropriate number or a high number of musicians than you would think. That would be involved in this, who have an actual fact. Do you think? I know Grant Cameron. I mean, he thinks that they're using some of these musicians, they being the space people, because they are able to get their message across to a more youthful audience.
Mm-hmm. Well, that could be. It may be that it's just that's the highway. That's the interdimensional place hopping threshold that happens. In order to move great distances, you've got to move in between dimensions, and it's only in the left hemisphere in our creativity. Music is creativity, art, dance. We'd find also probably contactees of extraterrestrials or ghosts in those creative arts also, because the dynamics, I believe, to get great time and space or interdimensional distances lives on where that creative threshold is, that people with imagination write, do architecture, do music, do creative graphics, write, even if it's just writing poetry, not just writing, it's a great thing, but go to the depths of creativity where the fabric, the yarn is built that will allow consciousness to go interdimensional. So maybe it's not so much on purpose as that they're doing it. That's what they're doing to get here. And anyone or anything that has that light switch flipped on can stick out their arm and grab the brass ring.
Well, I think Steven Spielberg certainly was one of the first to kind of bring that to the attention of the public when he had the Close Encounters theme or song, or as Dr. Hynek looked up at the object as it pulsated and changed colors and banged down different musical notes.
The Moody Blues song Slide Zone is about their abduction out of the car. They'd finished a gig. They were in the limo. They saw a bright light, pulled the car off the side of the road, got out, pointed at it, all fell asleep. All woke up dreamy-eyed in the car, the driver driving. Didn't talk and realized that 2.5, 3 hours had gone by. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, in another event at Indigo Ranch Recording Studio, in there doing, I think Mike was in there, Mike Pinder, a couple of other people, and Ray Thomas working on his personal album. This is approximately what it was. I think it was Mighty Oaks he was working on. And the window there all of a sudden was these five bright lights like fireflies coming up against the window, and they got brighter and brighter, and then they could see, everybody's looking at it, wow, look at that, it's lighting up the room, that someone was like, put their hand up against the glass and moved their face up to look in between their fingers, and now they could see the face.
Ooh.
Chew. And Mike did a song, 21st Century Traveler, or on his album, The Promise. Mike did a song about it, but Slide Zone is about that group out of the car abduction that happened. And every album has some graphic, a drawing, phrases, a song about it. On Days of Future Past, on the front cover is a knight with white armor on and a white satin shawl, and out at the end of his lance is the Adamski UFO.
Wow.
Remember that? Have you seen? Look at that again sometime. And there it is. So, and there's a lot of them that have had it, and then it has become also a device for promotion where maybe some entertainers say that it's happened just because they want to be in on it.
That's right. They want to make the front cover of the UFO, Tim Beckley's UFO Journal.
Yeah, right. Well, I think you'd be the perfect guy, you and Tim, to publish the program book of your annual Intergalactic Music Festival, featuring current and deceased entertainers performing live on stage.
Well, we had a
with
mutual
extraterrestrials.
We had a mutual friend, Mike Luckman, who passed away a couple of years ago. He wrote a book, Alien Rock, and he tried for a number of years to get funding. I mean, big funding, so that he could have a UFO related concert at some big speedway, I think in Canada or something like that. But the money never, there were promises made and promises not kept, and things along that.
It can be done. I mean, I'm sorry it didn't work out for him, but there's no reason that something like that can't be done just as a matter of fact.
Well, it takes the right people with the right connections and the big.
That exists. There's plenty of people with plenty of money, and there's plenty of people that technically know how to do it. There just has to be a poster boy and a leader, and that could be Tim and Tim.
There you go.
That's just what I think.
Hey guys, real quick, I just wanted to acknowledge Scott from Utah. He's listening in, and he just wanted to know if either of you have a comment about the recent, I guess, MUFON departures because of the MUFON conference with all the secret space program and some of the guests there that I guess a lot of people didn't feel were, exactly legitimate.
Well, I watched part of it on YouTube. And I found it kind of boring, to be honest with you. I mean, how much time traveling can you do to go to Mars? I mean, how do you prove something like that? I don't buy it. But some people seem to enjoy. The more fanciful the story, the more some people are riveted to it. I kind of still go with the I wouldn't say nuts and bolts, but I think that there's a great paranormal element to all of this, with a few maybe physical spaceships thrown in. I mean, I don't rule that out entirely. UFOs are a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But, I mean, if you ask my opinion, and I didn't go, so, I mean, probably nobody is asking my opinion, I would not have devoted an entire conference to one topic. I don't know. It's just it's not the way I would do things. But then I was a different promoter, and that's we tried to balance things out. We would have Fred Bell in one room giving his lecture about pyramids and all, while we would have Jesse Marcel Jr. In another room, and the woman with the crystal skull.
There you go. That's good. Yeah.
Going in the third room, and there was something for everybody. Yeah. And those were wonderful days. I mean, I really enjoyed doing it, but it is a heck of a lot of work, as you can attest to, Jim. I mean, because you were certainly involved in your own programs of that type, and it takes a dedicated staff and months and months and months, working in advance, a year in advance, and it takes a lot of energy, and don't quite have that stamina that I did in years past. But who's to say? You never can tell. I never say never, because I could change my mind tomorrow and rent out Madison Square Garden. You don't know.
That's
right. And we'll bring all your artifacts.
Okay.
Hey, we're almost out of time here. So, Jim, do you want to let our audience know where they can find out more about you online?
Well, I work in imaging still these days, but it's all through microscopes, and it's all on contract for labs. So if anyone is interested in sound and plants, atomic biology, atomic force microscopes, UFOs, or bump in the night, just email me. Toso at Cox.
But we do have a great outdoor interview that I did with Jim in Tucson, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that you can find on YouTube, where we get into more detail about Billy Meier and the Phoenix Lights. And of course, pick up a copy of Shirley Maclaine Meets the Palladians, The Amazing Flying Saucer Experience of Celebrities, Rock Stars, and the Rich and Famous. And you got photographs of Jim and Shirley Maclaine and the Moody Blues, and hundreds of other encounters.
Right on.
Right on.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on exploring the bizarre, and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the bizarre.